Good afternoon, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, and I do have some very good announcements of a couple sponsors that will be joining the show over the next couple of weeks. I do want to welcome in St. Aloysius Church from Jackson, New Jersey, which is located on Bennett's Mills Road. We'll be providing a lot more information as we go forward, and do welcome them as one of the first sponsors for the Passball Show. A ton of stuff we're going to get into today. I mean, if you had a chance to listen to the program yesterday, you kind of see my take in regards to Major League Baseball and its Hall of Fame process, which obviously is started, and it's controlled by the baseball writers, and it's almost allowed them to govern its Hall of Fame differently than other sports. And that's the main point that I wanted to get through yesterday. And it's a thing that frustrates me the most, because I don't think we'll ever see a situation like the Baseball Hall of Fame in any other sport. People are not perfect. People are flawed. But the problem is that baseball writers and a lot of fans, a lot of people that follow the game and are just as passionate about the game as I am and a lot of other people, feel that baseball is kind of on a pedestal by itself and is without conflict, or is without players and members that have flaws and make mistakes. Now, the NFL is a similar sport in regards to a series of players who are all not perfect. There's a lot of flawed players in regards to character that are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, that are in the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame, the NHL Hall of Fame. Major League Baseball seems to be the only sport that wants to govern its Hall of Fame as if it's going to be a bunch of angels, a bunch of perfect people, a bunch of people without any flaws whatsoever, people that are, critiqued to the point where they can't afford to do anything that's not right. Now, we could talk about the debates about the extent of what players that use performance-enhancing drugs did and what it meant to the game, and I'm not going to deny the fact that it was cheating. But why is baseball the only sport that has set its Hall of Fame almost to a point where even for the best of the best could be unattainable? I don't want to make it about solely steroids. I could bring up Pete Rose, but I don't want it to be all about Pete Rose. The facts are the facts. There's nobody in baseball history that has ever had any more hits than Pete Rose. There's nobody in baseball history that has ever hit more home runs, both in their career and in a single season, than Barry Bonds. There's nobody in baseball history that has come anywhere close to 7 Cy Young Awards. The players with the third and fourth highest batting average in baseball history are not in the Hall of Fame. Now, name one other sport out of the major sports that has anything close to those kind of issues. Now, you want to take on each one of those cases individually, fine. That's what people have done for years. They blame Pete Rose's situation on himself. They blame Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds' situation on the fact that they chose to use performance-enhancing drugs, or were implicated enough where it seems to be in a court of public opinion they use performance-enhancing drugs. The 1919 Black Sox scandal has forever kept Shoeless Joe Jackson out of the Hall of Fame. You could argue back and forth if you want that every one of these players was an absolute immortal to the game. Or if they're not an immortal, they were certainly amongst the best that ever played. So before the floodgates open with comments, which I've already gotten them, and I'm glad to have people involved in a discussion. You don't have to agree with me. But can we address that one first before we go at all the different issues of why guys aren't in the Hall of Fame? Because it's not like I don't know. And it's not like anybody that is a proponent of the Baseball Hall of Fame to have all the best players that accomplished all the best feats and put up the greatest numbers in its history enshrined where they belong. The issue that I'm going to continue to pound home is why are the other major sports not governed in the same way? And I'm not saying baseball's got it right. Obviously, I feel the opposite. But if we're going to grow this out into, only players in baseball have flaws. Only players in baseball have used steroids. Only players in baseball have gambled on the games that they play. You're going to tell me that there's not a dominant pro football player in the history of the sport that had issue betting on football? You're going to tell me that there aren't great football players that didn't use performance-enhancing drugs? Why does this only apply to baseball? Why are the other Hall of Fames, as they exist in professional sports, why do every single one of those other Hall of Fames have the best of the best? You could say the top 10 players. And you know what? It didn't matter what they did in their personal life. It didn't matter if they bet on the game. It didn't mean anything if they did steroids. In fact, it doesn't even get brought up. Players in other sports are not scrutinized at the level that Major League Baseball players are. So we could talk about all the reasons why Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson are not in a Hall of Fame. But the one thing that doesn't get addressed is why is it such a double standard when it applies to baseball as opposed to when it applies to other sports? Why aren't the top players in the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL scrutinized and their personal lives brought out there to the point that baseball players are? We could talk all day about players using steroids and cheating, but I find it really, really hard to believe that there wasn't a top pro football player that dominated the sport and got enshrined in a Hall of Fame and doesn't have any trace of the use of performance-enhancing drugs with them. And my question is, if that was the case, would that player be under the same scrutiny that Major League Baseball players are under? That's a question that has to be answered. Because we don't see, it bothers me because I think of it as almost a joke. How we could say the three other major sports, football, basketball, and hockey, don't have anybody that dominated the sport that ever tried to cheat the game. PEDs, gambling, whatever. Didn't do anything at the level of what we accused the players of the 1990s of doing in regards to using steroids. Obviously, there is a lot of proof that's been put out there. And the players in baseball do have to make their own bet. So if you're pro steroids, if you're anti-steroids, whatever it is, dude, you got the right to discuss it. But we have baseball that we've put on this pedestal in regards to being just the most saintly sport where anybody with the slightest flaw has it thrown in their face. And it doesn't apply to other sports. Once again, John Pielli here, number 732-364-3598. Please, if you have a dissenting opinion and you want to yell at me, the player cheated, whatever you want to say, let me know. 732-364-3598. We're going to get back into baseball in a little bit. I do want to talk a little bit about the XFL. Vince McMahon making the announcement today that the XFL is going to reemerge as a competitive football league starting in the year 2020. And obviously, if you remember, it was 17 years ago, the original XFL almost looked like a parody of the NFL. And let's be honest, I've studied documentaries of it. I watched a couple of the games during its 1 year of existence. But I made the comparison even then. Like, I would think of, the movie Airplane and how it was a spoof off of 0 Hour from 1957. And I looked at the XFL, and it's almost like, in so many different ways, it was kind of poking fun at the NFL the way it was existing. The National Football League obviously was doing good ratings, was generating a lot of money even back then. And the XFL decided, hey, what can we do to kind of, number one, poke fun at it, but also try to come up with some different features that make the game and the experience a little bit different and hopefully a little bit better for the fans that are either watching on TV or showing up in person. Obviously, the one major issue that the XFL had before and will have again once it emerges in 2020 is the level of talent on the football field. People take their sports seriously. Yeah, let me open up a discussion about performance-enhancing drugs in baseball. You're going to get a lot of polarizing opinions. You're going to get a lot of people that are going to, be chomping at the bit to let you know exactly how they feel, even though their points have been made 1,000 times by 1,000 other people. But the thing that held the XFL back was the fact that it never picked up. It never emerged enough to the point where it got enough following. People didn't show up at the stadiums. People didn't tune in to the network broadcast. But what you did find out is that it ended up helping the NFL. The NFL actually came into it with an open enough mind. Probably didn't like the fact that it was competing against them. But you look at it from the perspective of entertainment. It added some things to the NFL that we haven't seen before. So what the XFL reemerging probably has the chance to do is give people that have followed the NFL and may be a little disheartened or upset or not happy with a lot of the stuff that's, whether it's political driven or, whatever the issues that exist in the game today, they may have another alternative. And that's one of the things that, I think Vince McMahon was thinking about when he put this thing back in. When he came to the decision, he says, hey, after 17 years, and let's be honest, the XFL turned out to be a disaster. It was entertainment up to a certain point, but the camera angles that were going up, cheerleader skirts, to a lot of the other things just didn't appeal to the typical football fan. So Vince McMahon and the XFL was in absolute disaster. That's why it only lasted one season. So now you're looking at a guy who is, whether you like him or hate him, is a relatively good businessman. He's obviously been successful. He's done a couple things right in his life. And part of a successful businessman's mentality is knowing the right time to strike. And I've been thinking, for a while, what is the NFL going to do? It's obviously not going away. But you have people that have followed the NFL for years that now are now watching. There's a certain group of people in America, and listen, it's not necessarily one-sided. It's not necessarily, pro-American flag people that are pissed off because people were kneeling for the national anthem. There's been a lot of reasons that have contributed to people not tuning into the NFL and not showing up to games in person. The NFL ratings were down. And if there was one thing they could put it to, I'm sure the NFL would be able to fix it. Now, is the NFL dead? No. As long as fantasy football and gambling exist, the NFL is still going to do pretty well. The NFL, from a profit standpoint, is making just as much money as it ever did, and in some cases is making more. Is it all profit now? No, I'm sure they're losing a little bit in revenue somewhere. Maybe they're not making the same margins that they were making at this time last year or this time 2 years ago. But the thing about the XFL, which I think can be appealing, is if they have a strict set of guidelines, they decide that they want to appeal to the fan that turned away and didn't want to make it about what players were kneeling for the national anthem. Didn't want to make it about which players were protesting. First they were protesting police brutality, then they're protesting the president. A lot of people go to sports and tune into sports and show up at sporting events to give themselves a break for all the other BS that exists in this world. And politics gets thrown in your face every single opportunity. Except for the show, because I'm not going to tolerate any political discussion whatsoever. In fact, I'm not even going to go to a point where I'm going to give any political opinions. But people tune into sports and entertainment because they want to get themselves away from the BS that goes on in real life. The BS that goes on with the news. Politics, the fact that it's always out there. Everybody has to throw an opinion in there. And you know what? People that look for entertainment look to block that stuff out of their mind for an hour or two at a time. So a lot of people were pissed off when politics got involved in the National Football League. And I think to some extent, some positive things were done about it. Some messages were sent out there. Looks like the NFL is trying to do a little more about some of the issues that were brought up. I don't have any problem with that. But it's, once again, trying to take you, the viewer, and focus you on something that you don't want to be focusing on. What you want to watch as a pro football fan is the game on the field. If you're a fan of whatever team, you're rooting for that team to win. And the 60 minutes while that game's going on that, either on that television network or when you're there at the stadium, you want it to be, at least about 95% worth of that. Maybe a little bit on food, maybe a little bit on text messages and communicating with your family, maybe a little bit on checking your fantasy football scores. But so the NFL certainly could have done a better job. And there are suffering in some cases because of this. Ratings are down. A lot of people are disgusting. A lot of people are disgusted. Now, what the XFL has a chance to do, and this is part of what Vince McMahon's thinking, a certain group of fans always tuned into the NFL, would watch the game religiously, either in person or on TV. And they're not anymore. It doesn't mean that they hate football. Some of them may never come back. Some of them, there may be no chance that you could ever get some fans to come back and pay attention to the NFL game. They're so disgusting. But I would say the majority of them have a little bit of empathy towards the league. It's something that they followed for a long time. If all things were equal, they would like to watch their National Football League game. Had Colin Kaepernick not done what he did, and the other National Football League players did what they did by kneeling for the national anthem, I promise you, Vince McMahon would probably have never thought about getting the XFL started again. But what Vince McMahon did as a businessman, which, like I said, love him or hate him, he's been successful as a businessman. He decides, all right, how do I appeal to the fans that aren't tuning into the NFL? Like I said, there's some of them that are never going to come back. You got to accept that. But for the ones that do want to tune in and are just disgusted right now with what they're seeing, with politics being thrown in there, and the fact that they're watching the game because they want to get away from politics, will the XFL be successful? I'm leaning towards no. But I tell you, it has a chance. It has a chance if they could reach out to the fan and give them something that the National Football League is not providing for them. You could give them a quicker game. You could give them a lot of other things. You could take politics out of it whatsoever. Whatever type of rules that you put in there. You can govern it any way that you want if you're Vince McMahon and whoever's running the league. Can you get enough differences from that of what's disgusted so many football fans over the past couple of years to intrigue them enough to want to watch? And if you can, that's a start. But let's address the gigantic white elephant in the room. The top players and the top athletes want to play in the NFL. And they always will want to play in the NFL. The XFL, even if it has great success, will probably never be in a position to lure players out from the NFL. And I would think from a financial standpoint, I don't think they would be able to pay players anywhere near as much as what the players are making in the NFL. What made the XFL fail was the level of competition on the football field. If you're Bob Costas, you can mention a couple other reasons. And if you're a casual fan and you say, this bothered me or that bothered me or I didn't like this, you could come up with a couple other reasons. The main reason that the XFL failed was because of the level of competition. There was a handful of players that played a little bit in the NFL after playing in the XFL for that 1 year. You look at other leagues like the CFL and the USFL, the ones that had some level of success for a certain period of time were able to lure some top players to playing for them. And it's going to have to start right off the bat. Because, watching a couple washed up former NFL players and a group of players that couldn't get a job in the NFL after college is probably not going to set up enough of a level of competition to make it interesting for that fan. And remember, that fan that they're looking to appeal to is already disgusted with the NFL. So I would say the first thing that the XFL has to do if it wants to succeed, it's going to have to prove that there's going to be a level of competition that's going to be worth it for that casual fan or that turned away former NFL fan to want to give it a look. And they may give it a look, but that level of competition's got to continue on the field to a point where you could keep that fan. And I don't know, are you going to start the season right after the Super Bowl? Let's say you got, pro football all year round. He's certainly not going to want to compete with the likes of the NFL on a Sunday, or college football on a Saturday. That would be suicide. So I would say it's probably going to be played at a different time of year. Maybe in the springtime. Maybe finishing it off in the early part of summer. Training camps are filling out, of NFL teams. Preseason games are about to start. But I tell you, you look at the NFL in the state that it's in, I'm anxious to see, and I understand. We look at Super Bowl Sunday as being such a national holiday. We've now gone through a full year of NFL ratings taking a hit. A full year of a ton of good to very good pro football fans. As we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show. Once again, John Pielli with you. Number 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. Anything on your mind? Baseball, sports, unifying America. This is the Pass Ball Show. So the XFL, I'm saying it has a chance. Now, if I'm going to, I love numbers. I love probabilities. I love putting percentages and odds into things. I'm not going to say the odds are very high. Do I think if things continue to digress in the NFL by 2020, if things continue to go downhill and ratings continue to take a plummet, you may have a little more of a chance. But the one thing that I look at in regards to competition, you have to have something that's worth watching. And if you remember the days of, the 1980s and, of the USFL and past that, the years of the CFL, the reason those leagues had success, even in some cases for short periods of time, is they were finding players that were NFL caliber players. And they were giving them an opportunity to play probably more than they would in the NFL. So I understand from one aspect of it, when you think of the XFL and you say, hey, if it's competing with the National Football League, probably has less of a chance than if it isn't. But from a player standpoint, if the XFL can prove to be worth it enough to give somebody an alternative, let's say, and I'll throw a random, third string quarterback for, whatever team. We'll use Davis Webb of the Giants as an example. Or Christian Hackenberg with the Jets. Players that have spent time, Davis Webb just the 1 year, Christian Hackenberg a couple of years. Holding a club had the other couple of years. But they start looking at the time kind of fading away. And realizing that the only opportunity that is presented to them is to hold on to this roster spot on their respective team, or play in a different football league whatsoever. Because what does that quarterback or that player right now that is riding the bench or not dressing for an NFL team week in and week out, what alternative do they have? They could play arena football, but arena football is a completely different game. And you find that, good NFL players, even if they wanted to, they can't. And it's unfortunate. And I look at it from many different perspectives. And, for people watching on Facebook Live, I apologize, as we're going to jump back into it. So, glad you guys could join me. Anybody that missed the video before, unfortunately I had a bad connection. But we're talking about the XFL, but when I'm talking about options that National Football League players have, they want to be part of the 53-man roster. Maybe they're good enough to be a healthy scratch. Maybe they're that third-string quarterback in regards to, not getting much of an opportunity, but they still get to wear the uniform. And their only option right now is to play arena football, which, like I said, is a completely different game. There are good NFL players that probably couldn't play arena football. And obviously, good arena football players that probably couldn't make the transition to the National Football League or back to it. So what does the XFL provide for them? Well, you know what? All you need is a player like that, and I'm using just random third-string quarterbacks for New York football teams. Christian Hackenberg, Davis Webb. All you need is one of those quarterbacks who are overlooked in the National Football League to get a chance in the XFL and become a star. Pretty similar to the way Tommy Maddox did it. Unfortunately, the game it's set to a point, and I do apologize for the connection issues we're having with Facebook Live. I'll try it one more time, and if it ends up messing up again, we will end it for the day. So once again, sorry about the connection issues. If you are interested in following the show and it ends up crapping out one more time, I do give you the link to Periscope. Look me up on Periscope, John Pielli, or on YouTube. Same name, John Pielli. But just finishing up the discussion in regards to the XFL. Can it succeed? I think it can. I don't think it will. But what the National Football League doesn't have is another opportunity for somebody that may be overlooked on one of the 32 teams. Now, you've seen many examples of players that, yes, they were sitting on a bench on one team. They get released, they sign with another team, they get more of an opportunity to play, and they become stars. But now, there could be, and we'll find out if it ends up holding true, 2020, the reemergence of the XFL could give a player an opportunity to play regularly that wouldn't have gotten a chance in the NFL. Ratings are going to have a lot to do with it. And I do think there's a lot of disgusted football fans that may want to watch football in a closet. May say, you know what, I really do love the game, but I'm just pissed off about a lot of what I've seen over the last couple of years. I'm pissed off about the politics. I'm pissed off about challenges in the NFL and replay reviews and the games lasting longer than they ever have before. I'm pissed off about the commentary. I'm pissed off about the fact that football is put up on a pedestal and those at the highest part of it feel like they're untouchable. Maybe somebody else is pissed off because they're watching a group of black players playing for white coaches. Maybe at some point the league can step up and have more black head coaches. There's a lot of reasons for people to be upset with the National Football League. The Facebook stream just died for the third time. And, we played a whole game here. 3 strikes, you're out. So we're not going to mess with that anymore. Dude, want to thank everybody that's tuning in. The number, if you want to call in, is 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. We spent a lot of time talking about the XFL. We opened the program by talking about how baseball and its Hall of Fame The only sport out of the 4 major sports that refuses to honor the best players that they've had. You want to come at me with 100 reasons, steroids, gambling, whatever. It's still truth. It's still the honest truth. And it is kind of funny that, Joe Jackson, Pete Rose, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, you're not going to forget those players' names. There's probably no reason to do that. They accomplished a lot. Sure, there's stories that exist off the field are pretty strong. But I will tell you, their names will always be remembered. And in several instances, they will be remembered for the great things that they accomplished on the field. You can talk about the side stories. You can talk about the steroids. You can talk about the gambling. You can talk about every reason. You could talk about Benny Koff if you want. The only player in Major League Baseball history to be banned for life for a suspected theft of a car. But baseball, which a lot of people consider America's pastime, went through an awful stretch in the 19th century. Yes, the game emerged. Popularity grew. But it didn't necessarily have the greatest characters that existed then. So when you want to put Cap Anson in the Hall of Fame, who was an absolute and utter bigot, he went out of his way to make sure that blacks couldn't even play in a scrimmage against his white teams. And Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, who ran the sport like a dictator and would absolutely not even bring up the topic of bringing black players and allowing them to play with white players on the same baseball field. It doesn't change until Kennesaw Mountain Landis dies, which, by the way, he was given a lifetime contract. You're talking about an actual dictator that was presiding over the game. Yeah, we want to look at it and say that we should hold every single player to these tough standards. When baseball's Hall of Fame elected his first commissioner, no problem, without factoring in how bad of a person he really was. Cap Anson got 3,000 hits. When it came to nominate him for the Hall of Fame, it was all about the 3,000 hits. And nothing to do with the racist bigot that he was. And I understand we live in a different time. Still doesn't make it right. We talk about my country. There are very few people that wouldn't stand up to that if they were around in those times. So I don't want to hear the argument, times were different. We talk about the pre-Civil War days when slavery was running rampant. And you want to say that was okay because those were the times? Right now, we're happy to be joined by a man who does a lot of great things in regards to motivational speaking, and that's Ron Rabinowitz. Ron, John Pielli over in New Jersey. I appreciate you having a couple minutes.
Hi, John. How are you doing today?
Oh, very good, Ron. I really appreciate you joining the program.
You bet.
Hey, first thing I want to ask you, obviously you had a relationship with Jackie Robinson. How far back do you trace that, and exactly what happened to get that started?
Well, I grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and my dad wrote me a letter. Wrote Jackie a letter when I was 7 years old and told him how much I admired him. And he wrote back with an autographed picture. He said, next time the club's in Milwaukee playing the Braves, he'd love to meet me. At that time, the Atlanta Braves were the Milwaukee Braves.
Yeah.
And we went to a Dodger Brave game, and after the game, went down to the locker room and waited for him to come out. When he came out, I ran up to him with about 50 other kids, and I said, Jackie, I'm Ronnie Rabinowitz. Do you remember me? He said, sure I do. My dad standing over my shoulder, and he said, sure, Jackie, but the thousands of letters you get, how would you remember? He said, no, I remember your dad wrote me on lawyer stationery. My father was an attorney. From that time on, we were the greatest friends. He told me to stay in touch, so I'd write to him, and he'd write back to me in longhand. And I have all these letters written to him, and that he wrote to me, I mean. And on my 10th birthday party, he was at my birthday party singing happy birthday to me. When I graduated from high school, he sent me a telegram. So we were friends all the way up until the time he passed away in 1972.
Now, did you think at the time, in regards to the letters that you were sending, did you ever wonder as a kid, you're like, wow, out of all the letters that he got, what stood out to make him, reply to you, but not only that, remember you to a point where, you were able to keep and maintain a long friendship with?
Unbelievable. It was really something, John. It was, at first, as a kid, I loved him because he was helping my Dodgers win pennants. But as I grew up older, I realized how much more than just baseball he was, and what he did for this country and what he did for this world.
Now, and did you remember that, or did you notice that as at the time when you were a kid, or is this something you kind of learned more in your adult life?
Probably more after because as a kid, I was a kid, and I didn't realize all of that. But as I got older, I realized so much more. So much more.
And once again...
go ahead.
No, I was just letting people know, once again, we're listening to Ron Rabinowitz, known for the letters that he wrote to Jackie Robinson as a kid. Next question I would ask you, in regards to, obviously, time goes by, you follow Jackie through his entire career, and, I'm assuming you guys stayed friends, long after he was done playing.
Yes.
Did you, as a man that obviously was a big supporter of his, which, you had to be, did you find, or were you able to embrace the type of struggles that he had to go through, especially, in regards to, civil rights and stuff like that?
Oh, I did, John. He told me a lot of stories of some things that he went through, and they were horrific, and it was very sad for me. It was very sad for me to see what he had to go through. And yet we were the dearest of friends, and but he shared a lot of things with me. It was amazing.
Now, as as you get to know him a little later in his life, obviously he was also successful after baseball. Not only with everything he kept.
When I go around and speak, I share those stories and messages of who he was and what he went through. They say Babe Ruth changed baseball. Jackie Robinson changed America, and he did it alone. There was no civil rights movement. There was no, he was terrific. He was all alone.
Now, of course, yeah, no question about it. And I'll tell you, you of course having a chance to know him for a while. Would you say that, what would you say was the toughest thing that he ever revealed to you in regards to what he was dealing with?
Well, it was the horrible abuse. As a rookie in baseball, you have a lot of pressure anyhow to succeed. And here he was he was, not only did he have that pressure, he had all kinds of pressure, It was terrible. All the distractions that he had. And of course, he was doing so terrific.
Yeah, and I tell you, the way he was able to...
Do a favor. I'm actually driving for Uber right now, and I'm picking someone up. Can I call you back in a little bit? Would you mind?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we'll talk later, Ron.
I would love to talk to you further. Okay, thanks so much.
Hey, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate you coming on.
I'll call you back.
That's Ron Rabinowitz, and he's known for his letters that he wrote to Jackie Robinson. And I was hoping to get him at the beginning of the program. Unfortunately, he's over on the West Coast. Sometimes we get some time zone differences that we got to deal with. But I tell you, great insight. And this is a guy that knew Jackie Robinson from when he was 7 years old up through Jackie's death in 1972. And certainly one of the most impactful Americans and iconic, cultural heroes that exist in this country. Jackie Robinson started the civil rights movement. And, we've talked about, ways that we got to progress in society to get better, to be more open-minded, to be more understanding when it comes to the differences that we have. Well, Jackie Robinson took a responsibility that I'm not even sure he knew the length of what he was going through and what he was ending up having to go through and deal with. As growing up as a black man, I'm sure he understood that there was going to be racism. But now going in 1946 in the minor leagues, which I'm sure his year in Montreal gave him a little bit of preparation. One black man in a sport that had been considered a white man's sport. Had to be tough for him to go through. Not only to do it in 1946, but to do it obviously on the national landscape and the big stage in 1947. And it certainly wasn't easy. But I'll tell you, we talk about, American heroes. This is a guy that is certainly has to be up at the top of the list. Once again, John Pielli with you for a couple more minutes. We were talking about baseball, its Hall of Fame process. And I actually want to talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame vote itself, which I thought, based off of the projections and what we could expect, you have 4 very esteemed new members of the Hall of Fame. Chipper Jones and Jim Thome being brought in on the first ballot. There's no question they are first ballot Hall of Famers. The guy with 612 home runs, a guy in Chipper Jones who was the 3rd greatest switch hitter to ever play in a game. Then you got Trevor Hoffman, one of 2 pitchers to have 600 saves in their career. The other one's name is Mariano Rivera. He was just a model of consistency. Year after year. One of the top relievers. Now, there, for those that may be an anti-Hoffman guy, you may say, hey, he played a long time, he compiled some stats, may not have been the best in a big game. He did spend a long time playing for the San Diego Padres, who, by the way, were not very good. So his opportunity to play in the postseason was obviously under the microscope the couple times he was there. Now, had he led his team to a World Series championship, maybe those naysayers will go away. But I can't knock a player that was only in the postseason a couple times. One of the top closers? Sure. Is he as good as Raleigh Fingers, Goose Gossage, even up there with Elise Smith? Yeah, I think it's pretty close. But he is a Hall of Famer. And I'm glad that he got in as well. And of course, Vladimir Guerrero. If there was one shock on the ballot last year of a player that didn't get selected, it was Vladimir Guerrero. I know it was his first time eligible. He didn't fall that far off. But I looked at a player that really, for a good 10 to 12 years, dominated the sport. Hit for power, hit for average. You know, for the majority of his years when he played the field, was a great fielder with a tremendous throwing arm. And you could say Vlad was within the top 5 or 10 in regards to all of baseball for a good 10 to 12 years. So I'm glad he got in this year. As for Edgar Martinez, he's got a good chance to make it next year. The grassroots campaigns, which were out there to get him a lot more votes, certainly worked. He got over 70% of the vote when he wasn't anywhere near that last year. And next year when you have a ballot that's got Mariano Rivera, Roy Halladay, and really not very little else in regards to first-timers, Edgar Martinez has got a very good chance to make it in next year. Now, let me close up the program today by talking about what I spoke about at the beginning of the show. Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, sitting there at 57 and 56% respectively. The Hall just brought in 4 more players. Mariano and Edgar will be 2 next year. Does Roy Halladay get in? Maybe he gets a little more, respect for the career that he had because he's no longer with us. Roy Halladay is a Hall of Famer. The question's going to be, is he a first ballot Hall of Famer? And then it opens the discussion again for Bonds and Clemens, and if you want to throw it in there, Sammy Sosa and Manny Ramirez and other players like that. For all of those that love the fact that the steroid users are out of the Hall of Fame, first you got to know that there's a couple that are already in there. And the gravitational pull is going in the other direction. And it's leaning towards letting those players that use performance-enhancing drugs in. And when it does, it's going to open the floodgates. There's going to be a ton of them. So get used to it. It may not happen now. Right now, enjoy that time. Enjoy the fact that very few steroid users are in baseball's Hall of Fame. Because it's not always going to be that way. A couple are going to be let in, a couple more are going to be let in, and then the floodgates are going to open. We'll be back with you tomorrow, 8 o'clock p.m., right here on Periscope, Facebook Live, and on demand on YouTube. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.